This week, big brands and terrible passwords, attacking hotel guests, malware in your DNA. Some people hate Mandiant. Game of Thrones hackers are arrested. Gmail spam, smart, air quotes, smart locks. Researcher pleads not guilty. Don Pezet joins us this week to talk about his Juniper, and we're not talking trees. All that and more on this episode of Hack Naked News. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show that brings you the security news each week. And despite popular belief, we do wear pants. It's Hack Naked News.
Most of the organizations I work with,
They have released, yes, you read it,
actually do.
encryption key to the original Linux kernel security with Linux kit.
So I hope everybody has their resistance built up.
Brought to you by ITProTV is the resource to keep you and your IT team's skills up to date. ITProTV's team solution provides group pricing and access to their supervisor portal. You'll gain full control over your team's training schedule, see individual and group analytics, and more. ITProTV does IT live every day, so you know you're getting the most current IT training. Go to itpro.tv/hacknaked and use the code HN30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about ITProTV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome everyone to Hack Naked News. This is August, what's today's date? 15th, Tuesday, August 15th, and it's episode 136. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, here first to tell you about our fine friends at ITPro.tv. Don Pezet's actually on the show this week. I'll introduce him in our expert commentary section because he's an expert. You should visit itpro.tv/hacknaked, use the discount code HN30, and have your employer sign up for the supervisor portal. It's awesome. You get to manage your employees' training, assign training modules. It's a fun time. You can receive that discount for the lifetime of your active subscription, so make sure you go there and do that. Also, check out our fine friends at Domain Tools, who know that threat actors use domains and IP addresses to launch their attacks. They've got an awesome webcast coming up with some of their experts, Kyle Wilhoit and Tim Helming. DomainTools.com/Security Weekly. Learn all about Domain Tools Iris and all of the fascinating things they can do with information on domains and IP addresses. And now, the security news. Too many big online brands allow for terrible passwords. Dashlane, coincidentally enough, a company providing secure authentication, keep that in mind, although it doesn't invalidate their research because they evaluated the password security of major sites in the following ways. It doesn't, the 5 criteria were measured in their testing. Minimum password length, the enforcement of alphanumeric passwords, whether a strength assessment is offered, resistance to brute forcing, and whether or not multi-factor authentication is available. Some big sites scored a whopping 0 out of 5, include Uber, Spotify, Pandora, and Netflix, with Walmart, Instagram, Pinterest, SoundCloud, and Evernote, Macy's, and Dropbox scoring a 1 out of 5. And while this type of news never seems to go away, it will take some time before, 1, the average users are choosing passphrases instead of passwords, and 2, everyone is using some type of two-factor authentication. Until that day, well, usability and password brute forcing and reuse will rule. APT28 is using EternalBlue to attack hotels in Europe and the Middle East. One of the goals of the attack is to trick guests to download a malicious document masquerading as a hotel reservation form that, if opened and macros are enabled, installs a dropper file that ultimately downloads malware called Gamefish. Gamefish establishes a foothold in the target system as a way to install the open source tool Responder, according to FireEye. So when traveling, trust no one, not even your hotel network. Tether on your phone. That works usually much better and usually provides a much better level of security, in theory, anyhow. Researchers encode malware in DNA by compromising DNA sequencing software. In security, it's in our DNA. That's the slogan for this story. Bear with me. With everyone from academics to Microsoft looking at the prospect of storing data using DNA, it was probably inevitable that someone would start looking at the security implications. Apparently, they're worse than most people might have expected. It turns out it's possible to encode computer malware in DNA and use it to attack vulnerabilities on the computer that analyzes the sequences of that DNA. Let that sink in for a moment. The researchers didn't find an actual vulnerability in the DNA analysis software. Instead, they specifically made a version of some software with exploitable vulnerabilities to show that the risk is more than hypothetical. Still, an audit of some open source DNA analysis software shows that the academics who've been writing it haven't been paying much attention to best security practices. Hackers are still mocking FireEye and specifically Mandiant with the second dump. However, don't take this as the headline. I've been unable to confirm any details on the story about this second leak, which we, of course, talked about the first leak in air quotes. And it would seem that someone has a bone to pick with Mandiant. However, and again, there's no real evidence of a major breach or leak of any kind. The reporting websites are either not available, and the second pastebin leak link is not available either. Just some stuff on Twitter. Just putting the word out there. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Indian police arrest 4 Game of Thrones leakers. Indian police have arrested 4 people suspected of the leaking of an episode of the hugely popular TV show Game of Thrones before it was aired. 3 of the accused are current employees of Prime Focus Technology, and 1 is a former employer. Gmail now warns iOS users about suspicious links in the fight against phishing threats. Google announced last week that it's bringing anti-phishing security checks to its Gmail app for iOS, displaying a warning when a user clicks on a suspicious link in a Gmail message on an iPhone or iPad. This is good. Users need all the help they can get. However, I just hope it will not cause the pop-up fatigue that some users are experiencing, and then they'll be more inclined to click past security alerts. Hundreds of smart locks are bricked by a flubbed remote update. Now, this one on the surface might not seem that bad. However, remote lock 6i models are used in Airbnb hosts to create custom access codes for each of the guests without giving them the lock's physical key. As such, they sleep easy at night knowing a former guest can't burglar their rental property using a stolen key or discarded access code. Those custom access codes are stored on lock state's servers, meaning a remote lock 6i connectivity needs connectivity or no one's getting in with a code. Now, their agreement between lock state and Airbnb is exclusive, and also that means that if you mean all the lock codes for all the locks for Airbnb are stored on the internet, that this could have been much, much worse. So there were just a lot of frustrated people. However, that database is online where all those lock codes are stored. Very scary. WannaCry security researcher pleads not guilty to creating malware. Security researcher Marcus Hutchins, also known by his online alias Malware Tech, has entered a plea of not guilty against charges that he created the Kronos banking Trojans. Hutchins entered the plea in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a federal courthouse on August 14th. Hutchins is being represented by Marsha Hoffman, an attorney for the EFF, who was also a previous guest on the show. Excuse me. The more I read the story, the more it seems like Marcus is the good guy, especially if the EFF and Marsha Hoffman are representing him. Now, a very short break, and we're going to come back with a very special expert commentary segment about Juniper, not the trees, with Don Pezet from ITProTV. Has your network been breached? Cybereason can help you answer this question. Cybereason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To Cybereason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat attackers. Cybereason. Disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Make sure you go check out grim-co.com. They've got a great product called Crossbow, which lets you test malware safely in your environment. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got some content coming up on that. Also, SANS Hackfest, November 13th through the 20th in Bethesda, Maryland. The most offensive focused training event of the year. It includes the 2-day summit, 3 nights of net wars, a Coinapalooza, 1 night of Cyber City missions, and a super secret challenge. All alongside 9 courses taught by their top pen test authors and instructors. Hackfest Summit, November 13th through the 14th, is 2 days of talks and informative research curated by SANS fellow and friend of the podcast, Ed Scotus. I'll be presenting a talk titled How to Defend Against Penetration Testers and Win at a conference attended primarily by penetration testers and put on by pen testers. Go figure. I'm going to have to work on my running skills to run really fast. You can register at sans.org/hackfest17. But wait, there's more. Security Weekly listeners can save $300 off the 2-day Hackfest Summit by using the discount code HACKFEST17 at registration. Don Pezet is here with us today. Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Paul.
As it's always wonderful to have you on, Don, and I'm very excited to talk about not Juniper trees, but Juniper networking vulnerabilities, which are more interesting than the trees, or gin, I guess. Anyway.
Well, I guess it depends on how much you love trees, right?
It's true. It's true. Maybe you love trees like a lot.
Yeah, this was an interesting vulnerability that popped up, and I want to say it popped up last week, but the reality is this is actually kind of an old vulnerability that's been around. It's had a CVE tied to it. Where is it? CVE 2016-3074. Been out over a year, and it was just recently shown where it could be applied against quite a few Juniper routers and switches, so kind of across their system. And so it made the newswire, but it didn't get a whole lot of press. And I wanted to talk about it today because it's kind of an interesting one. When I think about an exploit against a router or a switch, I'm thinking, hey, there's all these routing protocols, there's the switching protocols, VPN, tunneling. There's all sorts of advanced functionality this hardware has.
The high availability,
that's what we're targeting.
The high availability protocols also are notoriously, as you know, Don, insecure.
Oh yeah. There was a lot of that in the Vault 7 releases, like Cisco's clustering and all. A lot of these vendors have problems like that. But this one was a vulnerability in a graphics library. And that's what kind of caught my attention. So I was like, wait a minute, what? A router, a switch, and a graphics library? How does that make any sense? And it goes back to a very old concept. And Paul, you used to teach a good bit. And one of the lessons that we have to beat into people is that you've got to reduce your attack surface. You've got to disable anything you don't need. And it is a rare network device today that doesn't come with some kind of web-based management interface. And that's exactly what we're seeing right here with this Juniper exploit, is that basically they had PHP running on the switch and on the routers to be able to render a lot of the graphics.
That's their first mistake. Anyway, continue.
and so now there's this vulnerability, a vulnerability that's been around for over a year and has been patched in like Red Hat and in a number of other operating systems have already taken care of it. And they just didn't necessarily think it applied to their equipment. And then here it pops up and it does. And this is functionality that a lot of us either don't use or don't care about or don't need and really should have been disabled. And I know I'm one who's always in the habit of disabling the GUIs, that if I'm on a Cisco router, Juniper router, or HP, like ProCurve switches, doesn't matter. I don't use the GUI. I SSH in, I do everything from the command line, mostly because that's how it was when I started. You kind of get in that habit. But people who are starting today, they get dropped right into this GUI world, and it really increases that attack surface. It gives attackers a whole lot more to work with to break into these systems. So, but
It's interesting. I love these kind of vulnerabilities for a lot of reasons. One, it's great fodder for us to talk about on our shows. Two, it's interesting that no matter how much you protect your own code, when you grow to a certain size and you're incorporating libraries from other people's software, how much that's just the same thing as having a heinous vulnerability in your own code. Three, these, in my estimation in talking with vendors, Don, are really somewhat easy to discover and fix. And I've seen large companies put out bug bounties and pay out a bug bounty because they had an old version of PHP in their code. And it like is somewhere in their software. And there's companies out there, Black Duck, Flexera, there's other ones out there too that provide you with libraries and software that you can use inside of your development environment, and it'll just hook into your source code repository, GitHub or SVN, and go tell you about all these vulnerabilities and pick out any flaws in open source software that you may have included in your own code and not discovered in your environment. So I think it's pretty lame that Juniper hasn't done that, being a large company like that.
Yeah, and not just that they're a large company, but that they really have made a great inroads in the ISP market.
Mm-hmm.
That in the enterprise space, you always hear like, oh, Cisco's the number one company. But when you go into ISPs, Cisco's not the number one company. That you see Juniper equipment there a lot. And this specifically targeted like T series and MX series routers, which are some of their higher end ones. And you might say, all right, well, I'm going to leave the web interface on, but I'll use firewall rules and things to make sure you can only get at it from the internal network. But if you're an ISP, these devices are plugged into very public networks, and securing them becomes that much more challenging. So I think that there's really a couple of lessons to learn here. But the main lesson is most of us don't need these GUIs. Most of us don't even use them. And so you can turn them off, and that eliminates or mitigates this. In fact, that was one of their first responses to this problem was, okay, as a short-term fix, just turn off the GUI.
Mm-hmm.
But then they released a patch, right? So there's our second lesson, which is we always need to be patching these things. But the third and probably most important lesson is that when a lot of these vendors create devices like a switch, they're focused on making the switch perform as great as possible. And the management software that's tacked onto it is oftentimes outsourced. It's oftentimes developed by some completely separate organization that was just contracted in to write the GUI for it. And it doesn't receive the same level of examination and scrutiny. You see that with like Cisco, where they have their Java-based GUIs that are just horrid because it's Java, but because it's all outsourced for the development of it, and you end up with a huge weakness there. So definitely something you want to keep an eye on. And we're using Juniper here as the example just because they hit the news last week, but the reality is it applies to any device that you have on your network, any webcams or firewalls, time servers, anything like that might have a web UI on it. The more features and functionality that web UI has, the more of an attack surface that device is going to have.
And you know what I realized too in doing a lot of IoT research, Don, is that implementing a web application on any kind of embedded device is actually pretty difficult. I mean, a lot of people can stand up a website in the next 10 seconds, right? By just going to register for an account. Those of us with some more skills, I mean, you can install Apache or Nginx really easily and put some plugins and you're doing PHP or any number of different application servers, and it's really easy to install those. When you get on something that has a proprietary processor or a different processor architecture in a very limited space and also has to run pretty lean, you can't just go get that stuff off the shelf. It's hard to get that stuff working in that environment. So as you mentioned, usually they'll outsource it or just borrow code from somewhere else. And I remember the Joel's backdoor vulnerability. That was the one where on D-Link routers, you could set, I think it was a cookie value to a certain thing, and it was like Joel's backdoor, backwards with some numbers and stuff around it. And if you had that cookie value set, you could access the web interface with no authentication. And what they uncovered, like an onion, was that it was in a lot of different model routers and different firmwares, because they got this Chinese company to make that code for them just once. And because it worked for them, they were just putting it on everything because they had paid for it, and it was portable, and it worked within their environment. So that the web interfaces are one of the other reasons why they're really evil.
Yeah, in a perfect world, they would have some kind of API for controlling the devices, right? That you didn't run a web interface on the appliance. You didn't have that kind of user interactivity. Instead, you had some kind of tokenized API access where you ran a client-side application to connect in and manage it. The problem is that they don't want to maintain a client-side application, and that's why Cisco went with Java for a lot of their stuff, which just sucked for performance. But at least it gave them this multi-platform solution. Although it never quite worked multi-platform, but that was the goal.
Did. And then they moved it to the cloud, so you manage all of your firewalls from the cloud. And people are hesitant to do that because now my firewall management's in the cloud, and that's not really what I'm going for security-wise.
And not only is it in the cloud, your firewall management or whatever has to be exposed to the internet, right? And granted, it's a secure tunnel, but it has to be exposed. In the past, I could say, you know what? I'm not going to allow anybody from the outside to connect to this device, and I'll manage it from my own system. So that's what they're up against. It's hard for these manufacturers to make a decision, and to make it just easy to get equipment out there and make it accessible, they put the web interface right on the device. And if they don't maintain it, then it's a problem. And even if they do maintain it, it's still up to us to update our firmware. And if we're not doing that, then we end up with these old libraries with exploits from a year ago, and it's making the news today. And when it's critical infrastructure like your routers and switches, that is a big, big deal.
Absolutely. Don Pezet from ITPro.tv, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of Hack Naked News. And that will conclude this edition. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time on Hack Naked News.